good to go for next.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is episode number 84. And tonight, Maggie and I are joined by Kirsten Cairns, Green Dragon from the OneRing.net. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Kirsten was one of our guests at our retrospective a couple weeks ago, where we captured dozens of hours of footage, and so you can Rings and Realms fans can still look forward to lots of discussions with Kirsten that you haven't seen yet, but which will be coming out over the course of the next few weeks.
And I have to say, a pretty epic poem is also going to be presented. That
Yes.
no spoilers, but a pretty epic poem.
A performance of an original poem by Kirsten also will be part of that, part of one of those broadcasts as well. So you have that to look forward to. Somebody, one of our Discord members requested a poem in a particular meter on a particular subject, and Kirsten, and you know, Maggie and I were like, we don't think we're going to have time for that. And Kirsten whipped one out, memorized it, and performed it.
And it was while we were it was while we were discussing some other topic. Like it was like just an aside for funsies. She whipped out in a couple of minutes, and all of a sudden she had this beautiful thing, and we're like, okay, roll camera. Let's make this.
Yes, exactly. So that was.
So we're thrilled that you are here today, and you guys might not know Kirsten, but you know she is definitely going to be a familiar voice to you because we have so many hours of content from Rings and Realms in the retrospective, but has been a longtime OG member of the OneRing.net. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks. I think, to be fair, I have to call myself a second age staffer at the One Ring.
Right.
There are still a hardcore group who were there from the very beginning and to whom I always tip my hat. So I'm a second ager, but I've been around for a while.
Understood. Yeah, the OneRing.net has become over the years one of those organizations, which have been around for so long that even the second agers like you have been around for longer than most other organizations have been there. So and I know Kirsten, you've been very involved with discussions with Warner Brother and panels. You've been going around doing hosting several panels. I know you hosted the panel that I got to attend at San Diego Comic-Con, and you were just hosting another one at New York Comic-Con as well. So I know.
New York.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say New York was actually the party. I did go to the panel, but we weren't involved. They got some guy to host the panel instead of me.
Yeah, I heard they brought in a scab, right?
From Colbert or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know
I think he knows a thing or two. Whatever. I mean,
yeah.
I have to admit, I kind of disgraced myself because I was fangirling so much about Stephen Colbert hosting the panel. And afterwards, I was chatting to one of my contacts at Warner's, and she was like, so what did you think? And obviously what she meant was, what do you think of the footage you saw of the film? And I was like, oh my God, Stephen Colbert. When I was chatting to her a couple of days later, she was like, so did you like the footage? Because all you talked about was Stephen Colbert.
You're like, my priorities are sound.
I did love the footage, but oh my God, Stephen Colbert.
Right. How much footage did they show in New York?
It was quite a big chunk that we got before the panel went live. I was quite surprised how much they showed us. I don't know, I should have timed it, but I would say it was a good 4 minutes or, it was a good chunk of the narrative from the early plot of the movie with Helm before he is no longer part of the plot. And him sort of going out and terrifying those who are laying siege around.
So it was Helm at Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
And was it a single scene or was it a montage of stuff?
There was one scene, they showed us other little clips as well, but there was one quite big chunk of a scene, which involved Hera discovering how Helm is getting out every night to lay waste to those who are besieging them, and then she encounters the two orcs that we see the glimpse of in the trailer, where the one's going, "What does Mordor want with rings?"
Right,
You know.
right, right. Why am I collecting
And
rings
then
for Mordor? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's right. And then once they realize that she's there because they smell man flesh or woman flesh, her father comes to her rescue and tries to take her back into the gates. Open the gates. And the gates are frozen, will only open just enough to let her back through. And so a kind of you must lead the Theoden and Eowyn type moment, you know, you must lead the people, and then the gate shuts behind him and he's left outside. And that was the end of the clip that we saw.
Interesting. Yeah,
Good.
that whole segment of the story in the text, I say segment of the story in the text, the entire story in the text is like, what, 3 paragraphs? I mean, it's really short. And yet that moment of the story, the Helm sneaking out at night and creating terror among the Dunlendings, and the myth, you know, spawning the myth that he ate the flesh of his enemies, right? It's such a, it is on the one hand both simultaneously one of the strangest moments, but also one of the most mythically powerful and suggestive, I think, moments in that whole story.
And it was interesting because I noticed that one of the, I can't remember who now, but some press had written up afterwards, maybe it was Collider, they had the headline like, "The footage from Helm's Deep punches our faces off," from New York Comic Con. And they were still saying, it's so dark. And it's like, well, yeah, but the little paragraph section that we have in the appendices is pretty dark.
Yeah.
People think he's eating human flesh.
Yes.
And in the clip that we saw, what was kind of cool was you got the sense that the people of Rohan were also becoming afraid of what they think their ruler has become.
Yes. Yeah. No, Helm's story is very dark, and he is it's funny because, like, just the name on its own, Helm Hammerhand, right, sounds like a totally heroic story, right? I mean, if you just
like
say,
King
like,
of the Vikings,
I'm going to tell the story of Helm Hammerhand, like, okay, like, we're prepared for like a mighty hero, and but the story of Helm Hammerhand is both a dark and disreputable story. Like, Helm does not at any point cover himself with glory, with like notoriety. Yes, like with you know, he becomes a legend, but like what he is legendary for is not heroism in any kind of like normal sort of way. So yeah, it is both a really fun and interesting choice of story to tell, but also a deeply like troubling and peculiar story to tell.
Right. And if you think about, like, in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, we have the horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound once more, as if this is a great thing.
Good thing,
and then
right?
in the clip that we were shown in New York, you see that people are frigging terrified when they hear that horn sound, because they think this demon, zombie, flesh-eating, undead ruler is coming to haunt them, and it's not quite the kind of noble heroism that we come to expect.
No, Theoden's charge to the sounding of Helm's horn is quite different in every way from what that horn was associated with in Dunlending lore and in history. So yeah, no, it's fascinating, and as an adaptation, as an adaptation challenge, like as a project, right? There are several things. So first of all, you've got a really interesting, though dark, disturbing complicated, highly non-trivial story. This is not a story. Like, this is a story that has a lot of intrigue. I mean, I've loved the choice from when it was first announced. I was like, that is so. I would love to see a feature film of the story of, you know, of like that era of Rohirrim history. But it's not straightforward. It's already complicated. And then you have, in addition to that, so then of course you have the fact that you're expanding into a feature film, about 3 paragraphs of text, right? So it's about a page of text. So there's a whole lot of fill in the blanks work to be done. And that's that's like, again, no, that's not even a challenge. That's just the definition of the project, right? In order to do this project, that's what's going to have to happen.
I mean, talk about adaptation choices. You got a few.
Yeah, a few. Yeah, exactly. You've got which is another reason why, like, it's one of the reasons why, in my opinion, it's pretty silly to, some people are like, why do they invent Hera, the protagonist? You know, like, why do they bring it when, you know, like, well, because there are actually not very many characters in the entire story. They have to invent characters. And I think having the protagonist not be, we wouldn't want the protagonist to be Helm.
Right, and this is the thing that I actually think they made a very wise choice there, and obviously we'll see how the character actually plays out in the film.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very knee-jerk reaction to be like, oh, they put a woman in there
There's that
just
element too,
put a
the
woman in
part.
there.
Yeah.
Because they haven't invented a character. She does exist as a character.
She's not named, but she exists. Yeah.
Right, and as has been pointed out when I've been chatting with some of the producers, writers, etc., she is a large part, as was typical for women in times gone by, and I'm sure sometimes still happens today, but she is a large part of why this war happens.
Yes.
It's, you know, they want her to be given in marriage.
Yes.
And so she's kind of a helpless pawn, as was often the case in dynasties creating marriages. But she's a very important piece on that chessboard.
Yes.
And I think it's a great choice to say, well, let's look at this character who we know survived, because, you know, Helm and his sons don't. And how do we bridge that story from the beginning of this war, this outbreak, to what comes thereafter? Who is a character who is present and is an important thread through all of that?
Right.
She's an obvious choice when you think about it like that. So again, if we see her turned into just some sort of girl power thing, which is not what I've seen at all in the footage. She's powerful, but she's, you know, she's in a society where women aren't supposed to be. Or so anyway, lots of question marks about how this Shield Maiden of Rohan will actually play out.
And I was just going to mention that element as well. Right, that it's not like they're just imposing a girl power element into a vacuum. There is plainly a Shield Maiden tradition in Rohan. And so yes, that, like, that's yet another thing. I mean, we get a clear sense that exists, but what did that look like? Right. Apart from Eowyn, who else was a Shield Maiden, under what circumstances? And so this seems to be a perfectly fair opportunity to kind of speculate about that.
Yeah, and I just think it's a pretty clever choice, like taking, you know, and Philippa Boyens said to me once in an interview, she's like, I think Tolkien would have named her if that had been a plot that he'd chosen to follow further. Now, you could say that about anything. He would have done this if he'd followed it. But the fact is, she is a character he created.
Yes.
And if he'd expanded on that story, we would have. Now, whether the choice of name they had for her is a great choice, that's a whole other issue. But
it is a little bit peculiar. But I you know, many people are like, it doesn't sound, you know, very Old English. It doesn't sound un-Old English. The problem is that it makes everybody think of the Greek goddess, and so you know, it's like, because it is already an existing name, that's the overlap that's hard to overcome.
And they addressed that at Comic-Con, didn't they? But kind of flippantly. They were just like, oh yeah, we don't mind that it reminds people of that goddess. Moving on. We're like, okay.
I think for some people as well, it's the choice of ending, that the A ending is I mean, I'm not an expert on Tolkien's languages, but we think of the A ending as being feminine because it is in Italian languages, but
Right.
it's not in Rohirrim.
No,
So,
it isn't, as Adola on YouTube was just saying. It's an Old English name, but it's a male name.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. Freka
Yes.
is a male
It's a
name.
male name.
So
Yeah.
they've even got a character in the movie who is male, who has the male ending to his name, and then they've kind of confused it by giving a female character that masculine ending. So yeah, I don't mind Hera as a name. I just think they could have gone with something very similar, but just different ending to the name.
Yeah. It's no, it is the naming, especially doing with the Old English stuff, is it's tricky. It's tricky. I mean, yeah. But anyway, the I'm kind of I don't really stumble on the name thing, but
I'm kind of happy to just let it slide.
yeah, me
Like,
too.
Yeah.
Me
agree
too.
with people when they say, "Oh, it's a
Yeah.
masculine ending in Old English." Da, da, da. Yeah,
Yeah.
But
okay.
also, I feel like we have so little to talk about with it so far that it's like the one thing people are focusing on. It's
Yeah.
like, okay,
It's always the
noted.
case in the build up to a
Let's
film,
project.
you know, like the dribs and drabs of information that you get lots and
Yeah.
lots of fixation and focus. But back to when I was talking about the overall adaptation challenges here, right? So you've got all the fill in the blank stuff, which again, there's not a challenge so much as it's just part of the nature of what this adaptation is. The two other things that I would call challenges of this adaptation are, first, the relationship to the previous films, right? You know, and of course we talked, you know, Maggie and I talked for a long time about the relationship to the Peter Jackson films, even that the Rings of Power had, right? I mean, any visual adaptation that comes out still likely for the next 20 years will have that still looming as something that it has to interact with. Here, of course, this is very different because we have Peter Jackson Presents at the very top of it, right? And so how are they going to manage that? But then the second element, sort of coupled with that, is the choice to transition to anime as a medium, right? The fact that this is not just, I mean, you would already have the relationship to like the old film, the parent film, in a sense. That would always be a factor and an element that would have to be worked through in this adaptation, both for good or for bad. And I don't just mean successfully or unsuccessfully. I mean, there are things that are good about that relationship that you can exploit, and there are things that are bad about that you have to overcome in the challenge of making the adaptation. But the transition to anime is one of the other major issues, right? Major kinds of questions here. And Kirsten, I know that you can't stay forever, so that's why I'm trying to get some like big picture conversations with you. Maggie and I want to go in detail through this tapestry image, which is really fun. And I'll come back, Kirsten, to asking you some like specific things related to the tapestry. But I'm delighted to get some kind of general conversation with you first. What are your thoughts about the anime thing and the whole like how they're approaching the kinds of challenges that brings as an adaptation?
Yeah, I think you know, first of all, as you just said, it's valid, perhaps more valid, for this to be closely in the realm of Peter Jackson's envisaging of Middle Earth because it's Peter Jackson Presents, right? So it's very much from the same house, the same folks working on it, etc. I think, you know, again, I had an interesting conversation with Jason DeMarco, one of the producers, about it. He's a big Godzilla fan, and he was talking about how Godzilla has been reimagined by different people,
Right.
or like James Bond might be reimagined by different people. So you can have movie franchises, as it were, that allow many hands to work on them and do things with them. I do think I've said before in conversations with people that I kind of wish we had got Guillermo del Toro's Hobbit.
Yes.
I did talk to John Howe about it once because he was involved in the planning and sketching and designing the early stages when
Mhm.
make the Hobbit.
Yes.
And I said to him, so what would it have been like? And he said, well, it would have been amazing, but it wouldn't have been Middle Earth. So
Wow.
he obviously felt that maybe it would have gone too far, but it would have liberated us a bit from the idea that only Peter Jackson's Middle Earth is valid. Or,
Yes.
but then, as Jason DeMarco was pointing out to me when we were chatting about it, that Peter Jackson's Middle Earth is actually kind of Alan Lee and John Howe's Middle Earth,
Yes.
and Alan Lee and John Howe's Middle Earth is Tolkien's Middle Earth, and so you layers and layers of interpretation. So what we have here, I would say, is a starting point that we've gone Tolkien through Alan Lee, John Howe, Weta, Richard Taylor, Peter Jackson, and now we get Kenji Kamiyama's version of that. So rather than going right back to the source, he's adding a layer onto what Peter Jackson has created.
That is such an important dynamic, right? That we're not getting the new directors, the new art directors' vision of Tolkien. We're getting their vision of this already mediated version.
Yes.
And again, there's like advantages and disadvantages to that, right?
Yeah, and I sort of like with the name where I'm like, well, okay, but I'm going to go with it. As a big fan of Peter Jackson's movies, I'm excited to go back there again. I'm cool with that. I like it less if I feel like, say, in Rings of Power, in places where I feel like, oh, they shouldn't feel so beholden to Peter Jackson. They should just do their own thing. When you're starting from a premise of actually we are in the Peter Jackson world and we're doing our own thing within that world, then I'm sort of okay with that. Like that's the premise that we're in.
That's the expectation. Yeah.
Right. And I do think Kamiyama is very much bringing his own vision then to that as a very experienced and distinguished director of anime. And he has talked himself. He talked in the panel, if anyone watched the panel when it was streamed from New York, and he talked with me. I don't speak Japanese, but through Joseph Chu, who was translating in an interview that we haven't shared yet on the One Ring, but we will, about how Tolkien has been an inspiration for him in his creative life. And this notion that Tolkien created not just a story, but an entire realm, down to the artifacts, the props and the set dressing of his world. And Kamiyama was saying that that's what anime seeks to do. Not just tell a story, but create an entire world in which the story exists. And he sees Tolkien as a direct inspiration for that. And that's why he and others have felt strongly that anime is a good medium for that,
Oh, that's an excellent detail. Being able to build into we talk about world building a lot and how important that is in adaptation, because if something doesn't fit in, then it takes you out of the story and everything is lost. So if he's already working with the understanding that you have to make the world as believable as possible in a world we're already familiar with.
Right.
That's a really lovely way to kind of bring that towards anime, which is fitting for that.
Right, and anime artists are used to doing that. They have that knowledge and experience of creating a world which is completely other than our world. There may be echoes that are familiar, but it's not our world. It's another realm. And so I think, for some people, I think the anime is a challenge because some people just don't want to watch an animated movie. Fair enough, if that's how they feel.
I've never been able to understand that myself.
I know.
I'm trying not to judge. Like, I acknowledge that it's true of some people. I've just never gotten it myself.
But especially in the last 10, 20 years, when animation has become so much more adult themed and very much it's not just for kids anymore. It's such a limited view to take out that entire genre.
I think I agree with you, and I think I understand in a way where it comes from, that a lot of us in the West, particularly I would say in America and in Britain, because in France they're very into their bande dessinée, the comic books that can be very adult. I remember as a child being in a newsagent's in France and being rather astonished by the X-rated comic books that were for sale in the newsagent, you know. But we tend to look at cartoons, animation in America and in the UK and think, oh, for children. And it has, even though lots of like Disney films and particularly Pixar films have very serious content and messages, we still tend to think, but it's for children. It might have a profound and serious message, but it's for children. Whereas in the Japanese anime culture, this is not always, it can be, but this also can be very much X-rated, it can be for adults. And so I think there's a hurdle to get over there of just saying to yourself, okay, just don't think of this as being, oh, but it's for kids. It's just another medium. It's just another way of telling a story. And having seen the footage with the epic sound, I mean, the sound editing on this, not just the music, which is fabulous, but the sound editing on the big screen, the incredible voice acting. I feel like if people can just go and see it, and I'm sounding like a paid spokesman now, which I absolutely am not, but I feel like you will quickly get immersed in it and sort of not forget, that's disingenuous, but cease to be aware of it being animated.
Yeah.
And certainly, again, Jason DeMarco has said that when he was talking to Peter Jackson about it, when they first showed him footage and they were sort of nervous, how was he going to feel? And he said, I thought I would have a hard time seeing it rendered in this different way. And he said, but within a few minutes, I was just right back in that world. It felt like I was back in the Middle Earth that we had created. And I do feel, I would say to anyone who's like, I don't really watch animated films, I'd say valid, but go and see it on a big screen with incredible surround sound and music. And I feel that within the first few minutes, you'll just be in Middle Earth and you won't be thinking anymore about how that Middle Earth has been rendered.
No, I think it's interesting. And of course, there's also, in addition to the whole live action versus animation thing, there's also the specific Japanese anime thing, right? Because there are different conventions of storytelling within the Japanese anime culture that I'm very conscious of when much anime is watched in my household. Most of it's not by me, but both of my kids watch a very great deal of anime. And so, I mean, I have seen enough of it to be able to see and feel the difference and to begin to get acclimated to like the kind of the grammar of how that works and the balance between sort of what is meant to be purely representational and what is meant to be, to be communicating more kind of conceptually than in a purely representational sense. But I assume there are going to be elements of the film that are likely to require that kind of an adjustment as well. I would assume.
I would think, but if you do a little bit of prep going into it, I mean, we say this all the time of just going with an open mind. Like, it's not going to ruin what you've loved before. And if you don't like it, don't engage with it again. But if you don't engage with it, then you're potentially missing an incredible opportunity to have this whole new experience that you wouldn't have allowed yourself. Like, who is losing here? So,
Right. And one of the things that leading you into your conversation about the tapestry poster, and before I head on my merry day.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really enjoyed in the footage we saw, and also in how they revealed this tapestry in New York, is the sort of layers of effects on the cartoon, on the animation, because yes, the figures are very much in the anime style and they're very recognizably in that sort of big-eyed, anime style, not cutesy in any way. Don't think I'm saying that, but we understand it to be in the anime style. But also we get things like snow swirling across the screen or sparks from a fire. And the tapestry, when it was revealed, was animated. So the
Yes.
fire in the image of the tapestry
It's
is
moving.
moving,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
snow is swirling. And those effects really added a depth and a verisimilitude to this animation that was very striking to me. And I think there's this sort of blurring of styles in a way there. Remember the first the art that was like one of the first promotional images that was of Helm standing and sort of snow over him, and it was a very different style
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
from the anime that we're seeing. But and so when I first saw the trailer, I was like, oh wow, that's so different from the original concept art image that they put out there. But the texture, if you like, of that concept art is present in the texture and the depth of the film that is added by this swirling smoke, swirling fire, swirling snow, whatever it might be. So that really struck me seeing it on the big screen. And I think that the Warner Brothers kind of their official tagline is that it's the, I think I'm getting this right, the epic animated movie. And I think that's completely accurate.
Sure.
It is animated and it is also epic. And
Yeah.
I for one, am very excited to see it. And if there are things I don't like in it, once I see the whole thing, I won't be shy of also
Right.
voicing
Exactly.
that.
I mean, it's.
Of course not. Yeah.
I do hope that people can just get over like a prima facie resistance to the idea of an animated film or a Japanese anime film in particular. Maggie, I mean, like you were saying about that, like to just kind of be willing to sort of receive it and see what, maybe you will learn something, maybe you'll like it better than you think. Especially, I mean, it's especially ironic. Well, I won't go into a long thing on this because Kirsten, I know you have to go. Never mind. I'll save that for later. Go ahead.
One last comment on that, though. Yes, I hope people who love Tolkien and are maybe not so into animated movies will say, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. And
Right.
you know, what have I got to lose? I might love it. And if I don't love it, I gave it a go. And I hope also that anime fans who maybe aren't into Tolkien will say, I wouldn't have gone to see a Tolkien movie, but I'm going to give it a go because it's anime. So hopefully it's going to open doors for lots of people to maybe find something new that they'll love.
You never know what's going to be somebody's gateway. You know, it's great.
Yeah, and a gate that swings both directions, right? Exactly as you suggest, and that would be awesome. That would be a wonderful outcome.
And I feel like, I mean, if we can leave any kind of legacy with Other Minds and Hands or any kind of discussion adaptation that we do, it's just to leave your pitchforks and torches at home. Just don't go in as an angry mob. Go in with an open mind and let's see what happens. You can be an angry mob later if you guys want to organize, but like initially, let's just stay chill, everybody.
Yes, exactly.
Well, thanks for letting me join you. I'm sorry that
thank you for joining us. We love chatting with you.
Thank you for the time that we were able to get with you, and we look forward to more conversation down the road.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Bye, Kirsten.
Bye, lovely.
Bye.
All right.
Fun.
Yeah, no, that was really good. So the thing I was going to say that I didn't want to launch into to waste Kirsten's time, there's a particular irony that I think somebody, was it Nameless Arcanum, I think was talking about it. No, it was Gregory Simonson on YouTube was talking about this. That there's a particular irony to Tolkien fans having a kind of prima facie resistance to animated films, especially if their resistance is based even indirectly on the whole, like, but cartoons are for children. You know, I cannot be expected as an adult to take cartoons seriously. There's an enormous irony, of course, in any Tolkien fan taking that line, because, of course, that was exactly fantasy before Tolkien, as Gregory said. Like, Tolkien himself fought, you know, to encourage people to be open-minded and say, hey, look, fantasy, fairy tales, science fiction are not just for kids. Like, they are important. Tolkien was the person who really led that charge even others like C.S. Lewis, who were also really influential in helping to make that happen, quoted Tolkien. Like Lewis always credits Tolkien with being at the vanguard of that particular thing. So it would be in my opinion a sort of ridiculous irony for a Tolkien fan to be like, oh no, that's so childish.
I don't do that. Yeah.
I am above that childish thing. When that's of course exactly the reason not to read Tolkien in the first place for the first generation.
That's so funny. And like that just made me think about it filmically too, of like science fiction and fantasy has never been considered a real art form within the world of cinema until Lord of the Rings was nominated for as many Academy Awards as it was. Like things have happened before. Obviously things have gotten nods, but mostly for technical stuff, not necessarily for that mass of awards. So it really paved the way in terms of things that could follow as well.
And
I don't think we would have had Dune if we didn't have Jackson's trilogy, you know?
Right, exactly. And of course the same kind of attitude, you know, that you know, the Film Academy, right? You know, the Motion Picture Academy was showing is what was the same as literature, right?
We only look at drama, we look at serious.
Yeah. I mean, I think of creative writing instructors, like my creative writing colleagues in my previous English departments, who all, you know, considered writing fantasy and science fiction as some kind of like inferior, and you know, exercise. You're not writing real serious literature. You're just writing fantasy. Like that has still been a thing, still is a thing in many ways. So yeah. Anyway, it's I have always. So it's hard because I don't like to be really critical of mindsets that I just don't share at all. Like it's easier for me to be like harsh about purism because I was a purist. Like I get it. Like I understand it. I was there and I've come out of it. I've never understood the resistance to, right? Exactly. I've never understood the resistance to animation. Like that's just been, I've always liked animated things. It's never felt weird to me as an adult to watch animated things. So it's harder for me to kind of talk about it in that way. But,
and I think, I mean, I don't want to just be a broken record, but I agree because like when you just say, I don't like animation, how much have you tried? Like it feels like the people that won't read something because it's a kid's book. Like who's this hurting? And you can criticize something as much as you want after you've engaged with it. But if you haven't engaged with it, then you don't really have a leg to stand on. There's no informed argument or discussion point there. So it's fine if you don't like animation, but tell me why or some of the things that might have fed into that decision. But to be honest, as soon as I started saying that, I'm like, I don't actually want to know. You do you. I'll do me.
Right.
We don't need to cross. It's fine.
Right. Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. No. Yes. AF the Drain it says, didn't Tolkien state he preferred an animated adaptation of The Lord of the Rings when he was talking about film rights? Yes, though keep in mind that was primarily because the limitations, like the special effects limitations, were such at that time that he believed that, I mean, remember what the kinds of things that Tolkien said about secondary belief, the difference between secondary belief and the willing suspension of disbelief, and think back to the things that he says in On Fairy Stories, specifically about stage drama, right? And his own reflections on how very imperfectly adult humans dressed up in animal costumes captured the fairy tale, you know, element of a human being able to communicate with animals, right? Like it's, you know, he's like, it's really difficult to convey these fantastic things. And that was a limitation thing. Like that was just that's a special effects limitation question. Yeah. And so considering those special effects limitations, he did feel at that time that an animated thing would be better for that reason. would he still now say the same thing? I don't know that he would, because of course technology has changed beyond anything that he was conceiving of at that time. So, that's my little kind of footnote that I would put onto that. But, anyway, okay.
We should probably talk about this image.
Yeah. So let's talk about the image. So
Half hour left.
First, let's look at the big picture, because the sort of one of the things that's really fun about this is kind of, on the one hand, there seems to be some sense of left to right narrative, right? Going through this, it's not easy to make the entire narrative this way, right? And I don't think I would feel betrayed if it turned out that this was not in rigid chronological order, right? Going through the film from left to right. But there certainly is a sense of flow from left to right. But there's also, I think, clearly, like, when we look at the big picture, there's also a sense of balance, and I would add imbalance, right? There's the thing that intrigues me most about this is, on the one hand, we have some plainly symmetrical elements. I'm trying not to look at the pictures of the details of the pictures. I'm looking at, like,
Right. I mean, like, 'cause that's where I was going to start, where, like, I want to kind of, like, talk about what I'm visually seeing, and then
Yes.
you fill in the gaps of what I'm seeing. You know what I mean? Where it's like, there's a lot happening visually that I think is really interesting structurally.
It is.
That
It is.
You're right with the balance and the imbalance. And initially, I mean, I was just smacked by the warm and the cold.
Yes.
So we have, these
color
three
schemes.
sections
Yep.
of warm, these three sections of cold, and then that last section is kind of warm cold. So
Right.
it's just, even that is just a really interesting progression.
Notice how that reflects the beginning, right? The first and the last, I'm tempted to call them panels, but they're distinctly not panels. They
Right.
ooze into each other, right?
Sections.
But yeah, the first and the last elements of this tapestry echo each other's color. Both of those have that, like, pale gold as the sort of dominant central color, right? You've got the gold through that archway behind Hera there on the left-hand side, and then you've got the gold sunlight reflecting on the tower and the warrior in golden armor at the end. So you've got the gold at beginning and end, and then everything in between is either hot or cold.
Yeah.
Right. It's either fire or snow, literally, but even the one on the left-hand side, like in the middle of the left-hand side, which doesn't actually have ice, still is very cold colored compared to obviously back and forth with the fire.
And
Yeah.
And movement was the other thing. So I want to talk about the movement of all these things too, because absolutely every section is either warm or cold or moving, except that dead center.
Yes.
So if you zoom in under the eye, the dead center, who is that? Why are they dead still, not facing us, not warm, not cold? I mean, they're completely counter to everything else that is going
Yes.
on in this image. And that's what I found the most interesting element of this panel.
Yeah. That's the center. And so, picking up on that, we'll come back to the question of, like, who is that and what's going on there. Also,
I'm like, no, Corey, tell me, who is that? All right, we
yeah,
can
no,
come back to it.
I don't know. Because it doesn't look like, I mean, it's not red hair, so it doesn't look like Hera, right?
No.
Yeah. But
Can't even tell if it's a man or a woman.
I can't even for sure
think it's a
tell
woman,
if it's a man
but
or a woman.
couldn't tell you. Okay. Anyway,
Nope.
all right. Continue.
Probably, I would guess man if I had to guess.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
But anyway, yeah, I would guess man. But anyway, picking up on that for just a second, that being in the center, not only is that a striking image as you're describing, like this sort of moment of calm in the middle of this tapestry, not motion, especially like on either side of it, you've got what looks like frantic drama, right? Of hot and cold varieties. and yet you have this cold non-activity in the middle. But the other thing is that that throws off. This whole thing feels like it leans to the right to me, right? The tower looks like it should be in the center, but it's off center. Like the tower with Helm standing in front of it, that looks like the central tableau, but it's to the right. The two, like that central thing with the two fire images flanking it, I would expect those three things, that to be the center and those to be on either side, but they're all skewed. They're all skewed to the right. It's just, it's not balanced in the way that my eyes expect it to be balanced. Whenever I look at it, I'm like leaning in one direction. And so I'm coming back to your observation about that central image. It's not only that that central image stands out intrinsically, but and I'm saying this sort of jokingly, it also messes up everything else. Like it throws everything, since the choice to make that the center means that the rest of the stuff isn't centered in a sense.
It does, but the more I'm staring at it, the more it makes sense in the way that you described it. Like, because that section of Helm in front of the tower looks like the central image, tell yourself it's not. Now, if you zoom in, I'm on a separate screen, but if you zoom in with just the hot fire on the left and the cold of Helm on the right, and in the center is the title with that cold person. And then in the foreground, we have these people forming a point, storming towards that peaceful person. The foreground people are covering both hot and cold. They are in the snow and in the flame. So we don't actually know which camp they're a part of.
Right.
So it's tying those two together, taking me towards that singular, peaceful, not moving person. It just makes me more interested in that person. But I think that framing with the title in the center of it, like, now I can look at this as the center of the picture because of that.
That is really interesting. Yeah, I had the two fire things, because the majority, like the dominant color tone of the tapestry is cold, right? The two fire things really stand out, right? And the fact that they're not centered, like, it messes with my brain. But you're right. When I kind of exclude the right-hand fire image, right? Yeah. So I'm zoomed in on it now. That by itself, if that's all we had, if this were just like a landscape poster that stopped on the left-hand side of the burning elephant and on the right-hand side of the frozen tower, then that image does not feel imbalanced. That feels like cold balancing hot. As you say, I love the way in which both scenes, both the elephant scene and the tower scene, look like they have armies charging towards them, right? And so the way that they merge those together, down to like this dude in the foreground here has sparks from the fire falling on his left-hand sleeve, and his hair is frozen on the right-hand side, right? Yeah. So they're all moving forward, and then you have that cool center with just that one image. And so I'm actually glad. If anybody knows who that is, don't tell me, because I don't want to know, actually. Here's why I say that. We're supposed to recognize some of these characters, right? Like we've been given them in trailers, we've been given them in stills. We're supposed to recognize that the frozen dude with the hammer is Helm Hammerhand. Like, we're supposed to recognize that. Just as in the early sections, we're supposed to know that the redheaded woman is Hera.
Exactly, that's
right.
Totally.
So we're supposed to know that, right? We've also been given, Wolf, the black-haired protagonist. So again, we're supposed to recognize that this is Wolf and Hera fighting on the right-hand flame picture, right?
Yeah.
So there are some of these things which, based on how they've been presenting this, what we've been seeing, the images and the trailers we've been releasing, those are people we're supposed to recognize. Nothing that they have released tells me who that's supposed to be in the middle. This is none of the major characters. What is it then? What do we see? Well, what we see is a blonde dude in Rohirrim armor with a green cloak, just like they wore in the movies, right? This looks, and standing with his horse.
When I really like Eric's comment, the horse looks more like Bill the Pony than Shadowfax. Like this
Yes.
is a very subtle horse. This is not a champion Rohirrim, you know?
Or at least the two of them are having a personal moment. This is not a battle, like, let's charge into
They're
battle.
very tired. I mean, it just looks like they need a nap.
Yeah, exactly. So it's,
Yeah.
and notice also in this image, we don't see his face. This is again
Yeah.
what I mean. Like, we're not supposed to know who this is. If it mattered who this person was, we'd like get his face, right? Even if they were just teasing him, like, you've not seen this character in the trailers yet, but prepare yourself for blonde dude with horse. Like, then they would show us his face, right? But they're not showing us his face. So I don't think his identity, for the sake of what's happening in this image, his identity doesn't matter. What matters is this is like a little essence of Rohan itself, right?
Yeah.
This is like a little glimpse of of Rohan and the Rohirric culture. Warrior with horse, personal connection between warrior and horse, right? And both of them having a really bad day, right? Both of them being, and not, which we can see not just from the colors, and the arrows around them, which are again around them in 3 dimensions. So this is not just, leftovers from the foreground scene or something, presumably. But then also, if we keep looking up above the title, is Edoras on fire.
Yeah.
Right. So the city up on the hill is Edoras. On the left there is Meduseld, the mead hall of the kings of Rohan, Theoden's hall in the Lord of the Rings. And we've got the whole city on fire up above. This is Edoras. This is the capital city of Rohan. And no, I disagree with you, Madman. I do not believe that this could be a Dunedain. Again, look at him. And remember, this is a Peter Jackson production. The armor style, the green cloak, the blonde hair, the ponytail, everything about this person says Rohirric warrior, right? This dude with this horse could have been in the charge of the Battle of Pelennor Field, right? I know historically we're before that, but you know what I mean? Like the visual cues we're getting. And remember, this is an adaptation that is explicitly banking on our familiarity with the Lord of the Rings films. Like we're supposed to be using that as a kind of grammar to interpret things, right? So there is no question in my mind. This is obviously a Rohirric warrior, clearly. Yes, as Eric says, look at his shin guards. I was just looking at that too. Look at his boots or shin guards, which look just like Theoden, the side of Theoden's helmet. You look at his vambraces, everything. Again, like if you've seen the movies, this is a Rohirric soldier, right? But we don't know who. And again, I think that's important because it's...
And also...
Go ahead.
And zooming in as much as you are too. This is... No, keep it in.
Keep it in, yeah.
Go back. Zooming in as much as you are, like, it's just showing you, even in this little snippet, how much we're supposed to focus on this.
Yes.
Like, look at how the arrows are placed at his feet. They are perfectly spaced out.
Yeah.
The flame is almost lighting him as if I was lighting this scene. I would put a light in front of him to glow onto his face.
Right.
We have the frame like a globe stage framed around him in the back, arching. And then we have the stairs on either side drawing our eye up towards him. So like everything is pulling us into focusing on this character.
And yet not him personally. Like we don't know. He is. So again, what this tells me, like the conclusion that I draw from this, that central panel tells me that this movie is not just about people. This is about Rohan. Right. This is about the Rohirrim in general. And of course, we're overlooking the fact that that's the word he's under. Right. It's like, I wonder what this is, what this image is about. Oh, maybe it's about the Rohirrim, right? Which is in huge letters superimposed up above it. Like, here he is. This is a glimpse of the Rohirrim in this film. Right. The Rohirrim with their city on fire. The Rohirrim in this moment of coldness, and it's the long winter, the moment of coldness, this moment of despair. This is this movie is going to depict the lowest point in Rohirrim history. The lowest point in Rohirrim. The moment when it looks like Rohan is gone. Rohan has been destroyed. There is only one moment. Since Rohan became Rohan, I mean, like since the founding of Rohan by Eorl the Young, this is the one moment when it looked like Rohan was going to be, as an entity, was going to be destroyed. And that the people of Rohan were going to lose everything that they have. Yeah.
I like how it slows the whole pace down too. So like when you do zoom out and we do look at it from left to right, which I think you're right, there is an absolute progression there of left to right. That moment slows us down. It kind of gives us like a little emotional core while staring at all of the chaos that's going on around with the rest of it. I mean, especially with like the beast and the fire on the right and the eagle descending from above on the sorry, I swapped on the left and the right. Like
Yes.
those are so mobile, so threatening, so much movement that having that in the center just slows us down and gives us a breath to read the title, to look at this emotional moment, to make me think there's really going to be an emotional core to this film, and then we progress through the rest of it.
And that it's not just that the core of it is not the action. It's the I mean, what this tells me is that at the center is the loss and the threat of loss, right? That's the heart of this film. Lots of action happening, right? Action and movement all around it. Action, movement, extremes, hot and cold, right? All this stuff is, so lots of activity, lots of stuff, but the true heart of it, again, that central image invites us to. Yeah, I hadn't really keyed in on that before, but now that you have, I think that's exactly.
It's hard to not stare at it a lot more now. Yeah. So do you want to talk from left to, I mean, we only have a few minutes left, but like, do you want to start from left to right, or do you want to talk like big picture now and then we can dig in a little bit more next time maybe?
Well, let's
hard to know where to focus.
Yeah, I'm trying to. So the motion is almost entirely left to right. That is, all the characters are focused on left to right, with the exception of the far right, with the guy in the golden armor who's charging to the left.
Yeah.
And that might simply be framing in this, because it might be a little bit weird if the motion on the left is like still leaving the tapestry entirely, right? But it does.
But also that it like perfectly lines up with the angle of the triangle there. Like it feels like an extra frame. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that. Yeah, the I love talking about parallelism. This is literal parallelism, right? Between the slope of the burning triangle and the slope of his arm. Yeah. There's parallelism, and then there's actual parallel lines.
Parallel.
Yeah, but
well, and that's fun to do too. Like, I don't know if you guys ever took an art class. Like, you can do that with this. Put a piece of tracing paper over this and draw the lines. Like, look at the towers. Look at the doorways. See where the points go. See how they line up with each other. What they're pointing to. It's like that triangle kind of guiding us back to the eagle. Like, there's just so much movement going on with where our eye is being directed. It's the arms of the sea monster. It's just
the ways in which, so there's this conceptually, it's also triangles, right? So many triangles in this, like the angles are always coming together. Not only do you have the so like, let's start with that burning building, like the burning A-frame that we see here, right? So that's like the most explicit triangle. And then, as you say, you've got the angle of his sword. But of course, the burning elephant, the fire is a triangle there too, right? With the guy with the axe up at the apex of that triangle. As you say, the reaching arms of the water monster aren't flat to make a perfect triangle, but they too bring that whole thing into this triangular kind of shape. Even that first scene with Hera in the middle in front of the archway, like the people and then the archway and the chandelier form a triangle there too. So we've got all of these triangle shapes and structures.
And that,
go ahead.
and that one I like too, because it's a triangle that you think the people in the foreground are where you're supposed to focus, but because it's that triangle shape with the light set in the background and the circles above, I mean, they're almost like holy, right? Like
Yes.
above her, drawing us into this very biblical looking image of her as the center point. So even though she's smaller and in the back, everything is making her the focal point of that little tableau.
Right, right. And I think that this is why. I think it's the triangularity of the images. Now that I'm working this through, I think that's why the tower felt to me like, to my eyes, as if it ought to be the middle.
Because it's so different.
Because
Yeah.
it's so vertical. Like it's the only, I mean, you get the Tower of Orthanc, but it doesn't even cover the whole thing, right? It's like something that's sticking up straight and so is kind of different. But even there, like you've got Orthanc, and then the way the people are below it is still like, it still has a vaguely triangular, and then the triangular mountains up behind it. So even that is sort of, does not disrupt the whole triangularity of the thing. But wham, that frozen tower with Helm Hammerhand in front of it is very vertical, and you've got the rounded arch, but the whole thing is very, there is not a triangle there other than as somebody was just saying, I've lost it. But like it makes an almost inverted triangle with the two, if you take the edges of the two burning triangles, right, as like parts of a big downward pointing arrow, right? It looks, but it doesn't have that same triangle. Like there's, all of them are triangles pointed upward. And then there we get that one central thing, which tells me, combined of course with Helm's posture there, you know, that this is something, this is the defiant thing, right? This is the one thing that is standing out, the thing that is resisting all of this stuff. And I really like the observation. And again, I apologize. I'm continuing to like lose people's comments here. Eric was saying the guy on the right looks like he's trying to stop the unstoppable motion of all of the rest of the scenes, right? Like everything else is, everything is moving left to right, but left to right on this image is like the destination that they're going to looks like disaster.
Yes.
Right. I mean, things are getting worse and worse as we go along. And for me, Hera is the center of that, right? We get Hera 3 times. So if I'm going to zoom in a bit and go, so we get her static on the left, looking on the left-hand panel. On the first panel, we see her looking to the left, right? Because she's on the same side as her father, Helm, right? And is opposed to the Dunlending ones. We'll talk about that more later. But then we get her riding out with her spear on her horse, moving left to right. And she is, again, it's framed as if she's emerging out of that scene. Like she's in both scenes, but she looks like she's emerging out of it, right? This is her. So what's in the background there? We see fire, but we see fire in the torches, like foreboding the fire to come. Because then when we see her again...
Then we also see her under that beam of sunlight, and there is almost a hopeful feeling there.
Yes,
that it
when she comes
to me
out.
feels very much, it feels very much like an escape. Like on the left, she's a prisoner. She is under the gaze of all those men. Her
And
future's
she's
being
caught between the two
decided
of them.
for her.
Yes.
Yeah, caught between
She's
the two.
small with the large figures of Freka and
Yeah.
Helm looming on either side, looking down at her. Yeah.
Yeah, future being decided for her, and then
Yeah.
the next one, she's in charge. She has autonomy on that horse.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And she's riding forward. And then when we see her again, she's now ragged, leaping out of a burning building. So once again, like she's framed by that triangle, and it's clearly we don't know what the structure is, but it's this triangular wooden structure, which, it's not like it's the same building. It's obviously not the same building. But again, we saw her emerging out of that. Well, we see her emerging out of it again, this time straight towards us. She's going neither right nor left, right? She's coming straight out of the burning building towards us, but things are obviously falling apart, right? Things have fallen apart. We're just seeing burning ruins, right? Yeah, I agree. We do see her 4 times technically. I'm pretty sure the eagle is talking to her. But I'm not counting that one for the moment, because that's not really an image of her so much as an image of the eagle, and the tiny little figure of her that we can barely see in this picture is a reminder that I'm talking about her action, her movement. Anyway, the point that I'm getting to is just back to Eric's comment about the dude on the right in the golden armor who seems to be opposing this, and the charge that he's leading going back in the opposite direction. We do have her autonomy, as you were saying, and she was hopeful before. And I think she's clearly associated with hope all the way through. Notice that golden light shining behind her under the eagle's wing first, and then coming out behind her, even in the midst of the fire, there's that golden light at the heart of it, right? Unlike, for instance, going back to the elephant, which is just fire all the way through, right?
Yeah.
Fire all the way to the middle. This is fire, but it's got that gold. There's like an explosion of gold light behind her, framing her, right, as she's leaping out of it. And yet still loss, destruction, like things are going bad. And then we get the reverse at the end.
And desperation. I mean, just looking at those different versions of Hera, you're seeing meek, demure, the beautiful flowing dress, into the trousers on a horse, powerful, into negotiating, into discussion. I mean, whatever it is with the eagle, it's something where she feels like she's autonomous again. And then she's fierce as hell.
Right.
Like desperate a little bit coming in on that scene. Mouth open, battle cry sounding, like you can hear that one. So watching the progression of a character in a still image that's released as marketing material, that's really impactful. That's so powerful.
Notice. Okay, so I just noticed three things. I just noticed another one. I just noticed 3 things in progression here. First, she seems to be wearing a garland. Like she's got flowers in her hair as she's leaping out of the flames there at the end. Like, see that wreath,
That'll look good.
That garland or crown that she's wearing? And that made me notice,
it's like yellow flowers.
Yeah, yellow flowers. But she's also wearing a dress. Again, she's not dressed the same as she was back there on the horse. I agree with you. There's a really striking and clear contrast between her formal feminine garb in the first scene and her, as you say, freedom. You think, like, look at the long sleeves and the flowing skirt. Like, you can't see anything of her body between waist and ground in that first scene, right? And look at, by comparison, her arms and legs and fingers, like she's free to move, right, in that second image. She's wearing a dress again. We can see like tights under it, but she's wearing a dress in that scene. And the third thing I just noticed, there's an eagle on the front of her dress. Yeah. Mirroring the eagle that she's talking to in this previous scene. And she has a sunburst, fourth thing. She has a sunburst on her shield, which is like the gold light that's shining behind her, right? Iconographically echoing this golden sunlight that is associated with her in 4 of the 4 images, because she's got the golden light behind her in the first image too. In all of the images, she's associated with this golden sunlight.
I'm zooming in on her sword. I think it is the 2 horses hilt.
Maybe. Possibly.
There's just a lot going on. See costume, guys. Costume tells such a story.
Yes, it does. Okay. So, I'm going to take a stab at the story of this movie. Here's the story of this movie that I think this image is telling us.
I'm ready.
Hera, who is being used as a pawn in a very masculine-dominated political environment, strikes out on her own to do something. This either leads to or is part of enormous conflicts, which she is going to bring hope in, but then she dies, and her example is what inspires the hope for ultimate victory in the end. I wasn't sure if Hera was going to die or not, but now I'm sure.
Oh, okay.
Well, I say sure. This image suggests it to me. Let me tell you the number one thing that suggests that she's going to die. The thing that suggests that she's going to die is that is the light, the golden light. The golden light is the Hera light in this whole thing. The golden light, the sunlight, is associated with her all the way through. But in the final scene, the golden light is now shining on the whole scene and on the faces of the Rohirrim who are charging in, but she's not in that scene. And they're going back in the opposite direction. That's what I think.
I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I can see what you see.
Now, again, I'm not saying that I'm predicting this is absolutely what's happening in the film.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is this is what I'm getting from this image.
That's what you're reading.
Yeah, this is what I'm reading in this image. And of course, like whether I am picking up what they're putting down, in this image, or whether what the people are putting down in this image matches up well to the film, like, who knows, right? There's lots of questions about that. There's often many gaps between the story that the film tells and the story that the marketing tells, right?
Right.
But that's what I'm picking up.
I can get on board with that.
That's what I'm picking up. There's a lot more to talk about here. Let's come back and talk about this more next time, and then think more. So I have studiously avoided 3 things.
Okay. I was gonna say there's quite a few things we haven't even touched on.
Exactly.
We'll have a lot more to talk about next time.
Here are the things I've avoided. I've avoided the water monster.
Yep.
I've avoided the hobbits.
Yep.
And I've avoided the elephant. Qua elephant. Right. I mean, we've talked about it as like part of the balance and things, but the whole, like, why are we fighting Umilkil? Yeah. Also, I haven't talked about Isengard, Orthancs being there. And so I want to come back next time and dig in a little bit more to the story elements that we know.
Yeah. No troll.
Helm, Hammerhand, and that scene. This image, I was surprised by their inclusion of this image. The image of Helm. The image of Helm shocked me. But we'll talk more next time why I found that particularly shocking. And the eagle. We've mentioned the eagle, but like, why the eagle?
Talk about the eagle. Yeah.
What's up with the eagle? Why is there an eagle? Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot more to talk about. So we'll talk about that stuff more. I was delighted. It was only sort of at the last minute that Kirsten was able to join us, so that was kind of an unexpected but really fun opportunity. I know she has a lot of insight into that because she's had lots of conversations with the production team. From the from some of the artists and actors up to Philippa Boyens and others, and and Kamiyama and everybody. So I'm delighted to hear her. I was delighted to have that larger conversation.
Yeah, it's nice to kind of set the tone of like, we can talk about this for weeks, but it was nice to just have a little bit of a big picture because we've only seen the clip so far, right? We've only compared those two trailers really and a
Yes.
couple of stills we've gotten. So it's nice to take a step back and be like, okay, what's this story going to be? What are we looking at?
Well,
And especially with her fresh off New York Comic Con where they released so much, like that was their big marketing
yes.
event.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think was a really good plan by them. Falling as it did so conveniently just a few weeks after the Rings of Power ended, so that instead of trying to sort of shout down the Rings of Power while it was happening, and I always like it best. I dislike you know marketing that's just trying to compete with other
Hmm.
things that are happening, right? Especially if they're things like both of which I'm interested. I'm always like, why do we have to fight, people? Can't we just all surely I can watch both, right? And be equally excited
Yeah.
for both. Like, don't make me choose. But anyway, yeah, so I love this. This is so much better to me than stills. Like we've had stills
Yeah.
but I've always really stills I'm hesitant to talk about because there you're getting literally the tiniest possible snippet of a larger scene, and there's just no context, and it's
Yeah.
it's really hard.
Yeah.
Getting a taste for the visual feel of the thing is cool, but as far as like digging in and doing analysis, but this is the kind of image you can really dig in and do analysis for, and
Totally.
this whole tapestry shape of it is lovely. This is one of my favorite things that the Peter Jackson team does, is these marketing tapestries. I think everybody should do marketing tapestries like this. It's so cool.
They're
All
a
right.
lot of
So we will
put
we'll
a pin
pick
in
up on
that.
this next time and come back and discuss the rest of the things we haven't discussed. Talk a little bit more about some of the story angles, stuff that we know from the book about these things, and some things that we might be puzzled about from a book perspective, to kind of lay the foundations for some of the things that we're gonna need to be prepared for. But anyway, okay. Thanks everybody for joining us. We will
Awesome.
resume that next week. All right. Very good. And
Thanks.
you're around next week, right, Maggie?
I'm
Okay.
good.
All right. I think as far as I know, we should be good to go next week. So very good. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye now.
Here.